All right, guys, so you just saw the video of the time lapse of the assembly and also a small time lapse of applying the water transfer decals. So that's really the first plane that I've ever really worked with doing water transfer decals. I've done some smaller stuff before. This one was quite a challenge to do all of the water transfer decals on it. There was probably 2 hours worth of work there, and the hardest part is what you saw was the nose. So my advice to you, before you decide what livery, if you're going to do this plane, do the nose art first, because if you fail and really mess up one of the nose art decals, you obviously have two more that you can work with. The challenging part here is that they don't really give you placement. So by the time you wet the nose and you put the transfers on there and work them around to try and figure out where they go, then you have to form them, and they're not perfect. I got wrinkles and some stuff in some spots, but they look pretty good. I'm happy with it for the first real big go around, and I'm not looking to change it at this point. So I'm going to give you a quick view of what that looks like with some of the decals on there, so you get to see that. And then also I'm now going to start doing the panel lines and what I do for weathering on planes. So I'm going to show you what that looks like here in just a second. So let's get you spun around and take a look. So here we can just see some close-up of the nose art. You could take a walk around and look at the I went with the Indiana Black Snakes livery, is the one that I chose. So you can pick apart some wrinkles in there. It's definitely not perfect, but overall it's pretty decent. I'm happy with it. So definitely all types of water transfer decals on here. There is quite a few. So not so much on the wings, more or less on the nose of the plane. And they went on pretty easy. The rest of them, I think they turned out pretty good. Like I said, the nose art is really the centerpiece of this thing, but I think overall I'm happy with it. So now it comes down to panel lines and weathering. So I'm going to do all the panel lines first. You can see here, here's an example of the detail that I put in there. So how do I go about doing panel lines? Basically what I do with panel lines is I do some research for some pictures online, and then try and figure out roughly the scale idea of each panel, if they're accurate, and then exactly how long or how many rivets are actually in that panel, so I can kind of figure out spacing. And that's what I kind of did on these right here. So I kind of got an idea. And what I use is I just take a balsa dowel, hardened dowel, and I shape it. I don't have it real pointy. I sand down the edge there, if you can see that. And then what I do is I try and get my spacing the way I want it. Try not to really puncture, but just indent the foam. And then as you do each panel, you just start working the spacing the way you want it. So I'll do this one for an example, and then we'll cut away next, and then we'll do weathering. So I just take that. And if you really wanted to make these, some guys 3D print tools, you could actually measure if you wanted to. If I get too close to the edge, then I just make the next one. So it's just, they're not corner rivets. Again, you can definitely make this a lot more scale or a lot dressier, depending on just how much time you want. I just want to add some detail to the plane, but I don't want to spend all month here doing this stuff. But this is tedious. So basically you throw on some music, and again, which I can't do because YouTube police get you. But when you're not recording, you can throw on some tunes, grab a drink, and plug away. So you could see there, that's what I do for panel lines. And then when I go to do my weathering, I'll show you guys that trick. So again, we'll cut into that in just a second. All right, so I'm done with my panel lines, so I hope you guys can see this. And I'll just skim over what all my panel lines kind of look like for you to be able to see that. Hopefully they turn out where you can see them, they're not shadowed. So I don't do every single panel on the whole plane. All I am really trying to do is just add some accents to different places. So you can see there, and I did up here, right? But I don't do every single panel that's on the plane. I try and follow some images if I have them from the internet and kind of use those for reference. And then again, you can see there, and then the detail. And then as I come around, again, just what looks to be, not everything gets rivets, but I'll show you why I do that as we come up here. So what do I do for weathering? When it comes down to weathering a plane like this one's, believe it or not, I don't know if you can see it, there's actually a two-tone shade, which is actually super cool because that is very scale looking to most of these planes, where they actually went with a two-tone gray in there. So you can kind of see that. I do not use an airbrush for weathering simply because I don't have one. So how do I go about weathering? So I'm going to show you guys how I do that, so you get to see. Everybody does these things a little bit different. So I'll show you what I use. So basically I get one of these cups. I got an assortment of brushes here. Some of the thicker ones I'll use for hinges, but this one is what I use for all my panel lines and rivets. So all I got to do is take some Walmart style, just acrylic black, or I use burnt sienna is another color. And I am going to take just a little scooper, and I just want a little bit of this stuff. And you can, if you do light, you can add more down the road. So I just put that in one of those little mixing cups, and then I also use some acrylic thinner. And all I want this stuff to look like is basically muddy water, if you will. I want it nice and thin. I want the stuff to run. So as you mix that stuff up, try not to splash it everywhere. And if you need to add more, you can add more. You can darken it up as much as you want, but these things splash around. I guess that's what happens when I use a plastic mix. So again, if you want, you can choose to add more to that. So if you guys can see that, it just looks like dirty water. That's kind of what it looks like. So on the plane, as we do this, I try and use, we'll position this here. I try and use some pictures just to get an idea of what I want to do off the internet. But basically, I'm going to take my thinnest brush. I'm going to take this one, very fine point, and I'm going to mix this thing in here. And I just want to drop, so that way it's got a heavy drop on this thing. And as you can see up here on the panel lines, I just accent all the panel lines, but I let whatever's going to happen happen. So I let that stuff get thick as far as like heavy, because if you can see that, I want that to run down all these panel lines. I want to see how that's running right there. That's exactly what I want. And this is how I do this. I'm sure there's some artistic technique or something to this thing. You could see how that trail's taken off. And then as it sits here, you can kind of just run your brush right along that stuff. So this is going to simulate actual weather, is what I want, like when it starts to tarnish the aluminum. And you can let this stuff sit, and then all I do is I just give it a brush. So as you can see up close, we are going to get that kind of fading weather effect to it. And some rivets, if I really zoom in on it here, so you see some darkness, darker sections in the panel lines, and it just really accents. But where it's wet, that'll actually dry off and leave a faded look right around all those panel lines. So that's all I'm going to do is accent these. So I'll do a couple more for you guys while you watch, and then I'll show you my other techniques. So I apologize for bouncing the camera around here. I'm trying to make this so you guys can see what I do. And again, everybody's got cool techniques and airbrushes and things like that. I try and use just as it would be with a natural kind of water effect. Just make those drops heavy, let them run. And on some of the areas, you can actually just let it sit there. And some areas are going to be dark and some aren't. And you can see like that trail's running all the way down, which is good. And we're just gonna brush away. So if you want something darker, you can definitely do darker. So right here around that accent on that nozzle, I'm going to do the same thing. And you can actually just brush some of that in there. And as you can see, and like that stuff, I'll probably just leave sit there and most of it will dry on. Now, for some of them, like I'm going to flip back here and I'll show you some of the leading edge slats of the flaps or the ailerons. Let me see if I can roll these down. So all I do with these is I actually take my brush and I just get just a hair of this acrylic paint on here. And as you can see here, right at these hinge marks, I'm just going to brush just a hair. Like that. So I'll let you guys see there at the hinge marks. And now what I'm going to do is bring you back over here again. I'm going to take my rag and I'm going to put some of this acrylic thinner on it. Like so. Just wet this thing. And I'm going to come back over to these black paint marks that I have. And I'm just going to wipe like that. And you can do more or less. You can go lighter. You can rub more if you want to, like that. So when these things roll up, they kind of give you that appearance. You can make them wider, skinnier, lighter, darker, and I just kind of like making a mix because when it comes down to weathering, everything's unpredictable. So that's going to give you guys an idea what I'm going to do, and we're going to spend a couple hours here weathering this thing, give it some life and details, and we'll check back in later. All right, guys, so again, here we go. I'm going to start on the other side. That side's pretty much well done. I'm going to start on this side for weathering. So I take this stuff, and again, drops. Just let it run. You can make some darker, some lighter, depends what you want. You can see that drop running there. And then I even take this and I just push the paintbrush down the panel lines, and you could see it overruns there. And some of this I'll wipe off, some I won't. Sometimes I make big lines. Sometimes I'll go back over to accent them a little darker. And there, remember, weathering is not always consistent. And then if you can see down here in this little opening, give it a little there and there, there, shading up in the inside. So basically this dirty water, if you will, and I'll accent almost everything that I want to pop on the plane. And if you want some, again, more dark, just add a little bit more of this stuff. But if you really want people to see all these little accents and doors, give them some dirty water, some acrylic. And we're going to let this stuff sit for a little bit. There in those openings again. And everything where the wind is going to break around it, I give it a shade. And again, if you let it sit, the longer you let it sit, the more it shades. And then especially on the canopy, as we do the canopy there, I will also, I start here because that's where it's going to be the darkest, or in the front as it comes around this way. So again, if you just want to shade the whole panel, then just do this. But when I come off of it, I go towards the rear of the plane. So this way it's going to actually shade around those panel lines. If you want to smear it like the wind would, then go like that, and it'll leave the runoff afterwards. And these aren't, weathering is not obnoxious, but every time I turn, I actually blot this stuff. I actually turn the rag so I'm not using a dirty spot. Because otherwise you just push ink where you don't want it. And the accents around there, I'll just let that dry. So here on these doors, like that. So when we do weathering, it is not obnoxious. I don't like obnoxious weathering. I like just subtle weathering. So I hope you can see that. When it dries, it'll darken up even a little bit more, and then I'll take you around. But if you want it to be just a square panel line shading, blot it a little bit towards. If you want the wind effect, then give it the push. Thanks. Anyway, again, from down in the lair, this is Brendan. Thanks for joining me. If you liked it, like it, subscribe, hit that bell button, share the stuff so that way, you know, the information gets out. Little tips, tricks, techniques for everybody. They could get to see it, maybe fall in love with the A10 as I did. It's been on the list for a long time. Really glad I made the decision to pull the trigger and go with this thing. Looks like a great plane. So again, peace out. Take care.